Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is our state senator, Tom Udall. Thank you for joining us.
Lorene, always great to be with you. I love coming back from Washington and being home here, and I get a chance to come in and visit with you and talk about the things we're doing in Washington and how we're working for New Mexico.
Well, we need updates. And now I just want to tell our audience, remind them a little bit about your background, that you were our New Mexico Attorney General from 1991 to 1999. Then you were our representative from 1999 to 2009. 2009, you entered the United States Senate. Thank you. You are now our senior senator.
That's right. That's right. A lot changes because we're in an ever-changing world. I didn't ever think when I was serving in the House that Pete Domenici and Jeff Bingaman would ever leave the Senate. I thought I'd see them there for my entire lifetime, and now they're both gone.
Well, we're so grateful because we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and you stand on their shoulders in the Senate for sure. Now, speaking of giants, you are taking on a giant task that we've got so much to talk about. But one of the reasons I wanted to have you here is to talk about your chemical reform bill called the Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. You and Senator Vitter are the sponsors. How many co-sponsors do you have?
We're up now. We started down in the range of 8 by both parties, and now we're at 11, so we have 22 co-sponsors. So we almost have 1/4 of the Senate on the bill. And the exciting thing is that this is a bill that seems to be, I've been working on it 2 years since Senator Lautenberg died, and it's been improving. It's been getting better on the public health side. It's been getting better on the environmental side, and we're just working with everybody we can in the Senate to see that it's improved upon, because the main thing we're doing is protecting our children from dangerous chemicals, protecting everybody, especially the vulnerable populations, from dangerous chemicals.
I think this is one of the most important things that anyone is doing now, and you're doing it, because we are bathed in chemicals in everything we eat, drink, our rugs, our furniture, our cars. Oh my gosh, even in mother's milk they find 200 toxic chemicals, and the EPA has not succeeded. They haven't protected us. What you're doing is protecting us from these chemicals by enacting common sense and necessary reforms to update TSCA. It's not an opera. It's the Toxic Substances Control Act. From when?
Yes, the Toxic Substances Control Act was put in 1976. And since that time, they've only acted on 5 chemicals.
No.
And then what happened? They act to ban 5 chemicals. In 1991, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals crippled the agency. It had a ruling that was so outrageous in a way.
Was that about asbestos?
It was about asbestos.
A known carcinogen.
Yes, and they prevented the Environmental Protection Agency from banning it. And that's what they were trying to do, is the agency was trying to move forward with a ban. And the Fifth Circuit said, oh, you haven't proved the right cost benefit, you haven't shown the least burdensome way to do that. And ever since then, since 1991, so imagine, we're talking 20 years plus here, the EPA hasn't been able to act to protect the public, to protect children, to protect vulnerable populations. And I want to just speak a little bit, Lorene, about what you said, because it's true. If you go back 75 years, most Americans did not have chemicals in their blood. And I saw a piece the other day where Bill Moyers, one of the reporters, you remember Bill well,
yeah.
He went out and tested himself and walked through the test with a scientist And he said they tested him for 150 chemicals. Today the test would be for 300, but they tested him, this was 10 years ago, they tested him for 150. He had 74 chemicals in his system and in his blood. And then they walked him through the chemicals, and the guy told him, he said he was a scientist, he said, you have dioxin. And Bill goes, dioxin? He says, that sounds horrible from what we know. And he says, well, you have 14 different kinds of dioxin.
Oh, no.
So we're surrounded by these chemicals, and we're in a kind of a chemical soup. And we have an agency that hasn't been able to act, and some states have been trying to act, but they haven't been able to act because they don't have the resources to really do it. And some of the bigger states can do a better job, but New Mexico is not protected at all. We do not have an agency that reviews chemicals, and so I'm fighting for New Mexico and all the other states. Some of them are big states like Ohio and Virginia, but some are smaller states like New Mexico that have no regulation on chemicals. We are relying on the EPA to do this.
So I just want to take a moment and focus on those numbers. So since 1976, the Environmental Protection Agency, there might be 80,000 chemicals that are questionable. They have stopped the production of what, five?
Five.
And they have kept 4 new ones from going onto the market.
That's right.
That is appalling.
Yeah. And the thing to know about the 84,000 chemicals is until we pass a new law, we cannot do anything about the existing chemicals because the other law grandfathered them in. And so we're in a situation where we have all these chemicals in the marketplace, and we need to address them with a strong cop on the beat, and that would be the Environmental Protection Agency.
Let's just hop across the pond to Europe, because what Europe does is you have to prove that your product is safe before it's put on the market. In this country, someone has to prove that it causes harm, and then you take it off the market. The other thing Europe has done is that they've stopped animal testing for chemicals. Right. So why can't we be like them in this one respect?
Well,
is it because we're a corporatocracy?
We have not moved nearly as quickly as a lot of other countries, not only Europe, but countries around the world have moved very aggressively. And Europe has a new, this is in the European Union, a new chemical safety law called REACH. And that is pushing the envelope on exactly what you're talking about, forcing companies to step forward, prove that it's safe before it goes on the market. So they're out in front of us on that, and they've banned a lot of chemicals that are in use here in the United States today.
And they sometimes dump products that have those chemicals that are banned there. They just send them to the Americans who'll take anything. Just let them have it.
It's not good for our citizens over here.
So why is this a window of opportunity? It seems to me, here you are in the Senate, we have so many other things to talk about that you're doing, but let's just focus on this for a minute, that you're in this partisan soup, right, and there's a lot of conflict. Look, you just finally got the Attorney General confirmed after all these things. So you've got all this, and you ride in with a bill that has bipartisan support that is very much needed. The Environmental Defense Fund did a poll of just Americans, and over 75% said, we need this bill. 75% of Americans. And they said, no, it's not perfect, and it's a step in the right direction. You know, we're just happy that somebody's going to be protecting us.
Yeah, it's the American people want us to get started. They know that we can't have a perfect bill. And how did it happen? It happened because a couple of years ago, Senator Lautenberg went to Senator Vitter, and they worked with each other, and they produced a bill, which I was on. And before that, Senator Lautenberg had what I would call the perfect bill, but we couldn't get any Republican votes, and we couldn't even get it to the Senate floor, and so we decided that we would work with him and Senator Vitter to improve on this bill, which was bipartisan. And as I said, it's gotten better on public health. It's gotten better on the environment. We're working so that there is a role for the states to enforce and a role for the federal government to enforce, because we have so many chemicals out there. There's a lot of work to be done for states and the federal government.
Now, politics has reared its head in that Barbara Boxer, Senator Boxer,
Yes.
had another bill to fix the chemical problem that we're having, but she didn't have bipartisan support, and she has then, in turn, perhaps a little ungraciously, decided to attack your bill.
That's right.
But there is a very important saying by Voltaire that you shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is, I think, a good bill. I think we really, really need it. But you've gotten flack from the left and from the right. That's what you get for stepping up. And so the environmentalists themselves have gotten perhaps some misinformation, or because it's not perfect. We wish it could be perfect. But I think we have to do something. So can you address, you are known as an environmentalist,
Sure.
a green, you're even wearing your green tie. But so what can you say to these environmentalists? Because in this time, people take a little bit of information and they want to be inflamed, they want to be outraged. And the things that they're upset about are not, well, talk to me. First of all, they say that you're cozy with the chemical industry. How does a bill get passed? Even like auto safety bills, you've got to work with the automobile manufacturers.
Yeah. What you hit on the head is the big environmental pieces of legislation, you used to talk to my father about those.
Yeah.
Clean air, clean water, Safe Water Drinking Act. Nobody passed a big piece of national environmental legislation without having everybody at the table. So you have to have industry come in and give comments and learn what the problems are going to be when you legislate. And so we just followed that great tradition of having everybody at the table and taking suggestions, and that's what gave rise to this comment. But there's no real truth to it, because they did not write the bill. We wrote the bill. We wrote the bill, yeah. But we were the most transparent group that's ever written a bill. We would circulate drafts, and then we would take comments, and we would re-edit, and then we put another draft out. And that's the way you write a bill. And it's very much, my wife Jill's writing a book now. And she works with her agent, and she works with her editor. And so she works on the book, and then she sends them a draft, and they send her comments. But she maintains control over what the book is actually going to be. And Senator Vitter and I maintain control over this bill. We write the bill, but we want everybody there to tell us what their issues are. And then we try to do everything we can to write the very best bill. But it's not going to be perfect. And as you said, let's not have the perfect be the enemy of the good.
One of the imperfections that your critics point out is that the safety standards don't have strong enough definitions. Unreasonable risks, for example, is a phrase in the bill, and they want it defined within an inch of its life.
What we actually do, and we not only did we have industry at the table, we had the major environmental groups, we had the Environmental Protection Agency, we had the states were telling us what they wanted, and one of the things the environmental groups said, you should have a strong environmental and public health standard. And so that's what we wrote. Mm-hmm. It's in the bill. And on top of that, they said a strong environmental and public health standard should have a recognition of vulnerable populations. So what are we talking about there? We're talking about children, pregnant women, the elderly, chemical workers. They're vulnerable because of various reasons. So we put in a vulnerability standard that's also in the bill. And what surprised me is when they got a lot of what they wanted, they certainly didn't get everything they wanted. Some of them weren't willing to acknowledge how good the bill was. But the Environmental Defense Fund, which is a very strong environmental organization. My father was a founder of the Environmental Defense Fund, and they stepped forward, and people can go on their website, edf.org, and look. They analyze the bill. They show the changes, how we moved in a better direction, and it's a good, solid bill. It's not perfect, but good, solid bill.
Well, we're speaking today with Senator Tom Udall about his good solid bill to reform chemical safety in the chemical industry and get the EPA up to speed. Two other little criticisms. I want you to answer
Please.
them. They say that there's an issue of preempting the states' rights.
Yes.
You say like everything that's in place up till now is going to stay, like California's Proposition 65, which worked to control asbestos and lead. And so why is this federal law? We're having a lot of issues with states' rights.
Yes.
Why is it written so that the feds preempt the state in this particular area?
Here's what we do. First of all, if the federal, there's so many chemicals to work on, as we've already talked about. And there's enough room for the states and enough room for the federal government. So it's estimated that, let's say, of the most dangerous, there's a list of about 1,000 out of the 84,000. It's estimated by the Environmental Protection Agency that they can probably only work on about 25 to 30 of these in the first 5 years.
Wow.
So the only thing that happens in our bill is if they start to work in the first 5 years on 25 or 30 of the 1,000, when they start working on them and start doing a safety assessment, then the states, for that particular use. Now, for example, if it was a shirt, shirts have formaldehyde when they're for not being ironed, so that they don't have to be ironed. So, but if the federal government starts to work on a shirt and the formaldehyde in shirts, but it doesn't work on any other issue, then the formaldehyde in carpets or the formaldehyde in tile, the states could work on. So we leave an open process, basically, where if the federal government's working on it, it's that particular use, they're preempted. Everything else, so I would say 975 chemicals for the state to work on. That's plenty of work to do. And as we get down the line, probably 15, 20, 30 years from now, let's take a look and see where we are. Have we analyzed the important chemicals that need to be analyzed? And we'll take another look at the statute at that point.
One of the aspects of the analysis of the chemicals is, does it always necessitate animal testing? Haven't we moved past that?
It doesn't. As you know, I was one of the leaders on the chimpanzees being retired from testing, and we worked with Senator Harkin and with the head of the NIH, and now they're really phasing out chimpanzees from testing, and the same is true here. You've noted that in Europe they do very little animal testing, and so we are building a standard into our bill that says if there's a better test than animal testing, then they need to explore that. They need to utilize that. We're trying to work on a provision that tries to deal with the animal testing part of this.
Thank you. Now, we'll leave the chemical testing aside because we just have a little time left, and I've got to get to some of these other big issues. Another grand battle that you fought for years is against Citizens United, which was a Supreme Court decision that said that money is speech and opened the floodgates for dark money to really affect our elections. How is that going?
Well, the important thing was the last Congress, we approached the leadership. We have our constitutional amendment, which would overturn Citizens United, take the big corporate money and the super PACs and all of that out of the system and roll back Citizens United. And we were able to get a vote, and a majority of senators voted for our constitutional amendment. Now in the campaign for the next election for president, both sides are talking about the dark money, getting it out, supporting a constitutional amendment. And so we've had Republicans and Secretary of State Clinton saying that she supports a constitutional amendment. So we're moving, we have momentum, and we're going to keep working on that.
Good. Thank you very much. It was painful, the last political campaign, and I just dread another one because it just gets so ugly. Congratulations on the Senate confirming the Attorney General. Took a long time, a very long time, but so how are things feeling in the Senate now? I see light at the end of the tunnel.
We make progress, but we make it slowly. Loretta Lynch was held up for so many days that it was really a disgrace. If you add the numbers, I mean, you could add the last 3 attorneys general and how long they had to wait, and she totaled them by far.
Yeah.
If you add all of those days together, and so it's this kind of obstruction is unacceptable. She is such a solid candidate. She should have been in there 3 months ago.
And with all
the
the legal issues that our country is just, all these police shootings and everything, we needed an attorney general to speak out on all these issues.
And the only reason it happened had to do with, and what would you expect an attorney general to say? She was asked about her opinion with regard to the president's immigration policy that he put out, and she said, well, she looked at it and she thought that she didn't know all the details. She didn't get into a lot of detail, but she said she thought he was within his prosecutorial discretion to allow some people to stay and keep families together. That's what the big fight was over. And I don't know any attorney general that would have said anything any differently.
Yeah. Now let's come back to New Mexico, because just today, you've been very busy today. You were at a child welfare function.
Yes.
There's something called the SONG Act.
Yes.
Save Our Next Generation.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming back to New Mexico. We always have been at the bottom in child welfare. What does this act want to do?
Well, the first thing we do with the SONG Act is we took a big look at all the various programs that existed. Let me take one here, like Head Start and Early Head Start. That program we know works. It really makes a difference on young people's lives. And yet, we have all these New Mexicans that are on a waiting list to get in. They're eligible, but they can't get in. And so we say, take the programs that work and fund them fully so they have the widest possible impact. And that will have a huge impact on child well-being. Then there's a child tax credit. There's also the earned income tax credit that helps middle-class families, lower-income families. We should make those permanent. We should raise the minimum wage. And so the SONG Act as a piece of legislation moves us forward on child well-being. And I was at a great group today. It was a symposium around the well-being of our children in New Mexico. There were 250 activists there. They had heard from experts around the country, and they're motivated. They want to pass this constitutional amendment that's before the New Mexico legislature that would take some of our rainy day funds and invest them in early childhood education. And I think that's a very worthy cause to be working on.
Then later on you went to a tech function, because you've done a lot of work about economic development and tech transfers, and my goodness, our economy needs it so badly. So what's up with economic development?
Well, we had a great event down in Albuquerque revolving around innovation and revolving, like you say, around tech transfer. Tech transfer should be something that really moves us forward, because we have these national laboratories, we have great universities, we have wonderful entrepreneurs, and you get them all working together, you can grow businesses. And I put in a bill that I managed to slip into, a larger bill, and we now, in urging the Department of Energy to move forward on tech transfer, we now have a good, solid office that's been started, and it's moving forward, and it's getting a lot of attention from the Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, who's setting up an office there.
Yes. We'll come back to my favorite topic. Your whole name is Thomas Stewart Udall, the Stewart named after your father. Tell me a little about your dad.
You bet.
Stewart Udall.
Dad, he was always an inspiration to me. I think one of the things that I carry with me always is that he thought you should do what you thought was right. He was one to stand on his principles. And then he said, it doesn't hurt to lose if you stand on your principles, because you know you've stood for something you believe in. And then you can move down the road on whatever it is. And so he had that within him. He passed it on to all of us, his children, and we're out in the arena now that he's gone, and working hard to improve our society, to try to make a difference and try to make a better world.
Well, he passed the Clear Air Water Quality and Clean Water Restoration Act, the Wilderness Act, the Endangered Species Preservation Act, Land and Water Conservation Fund Act, Solid Waste Disposal Act, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. What do you think he'd think of the battle that you're doing now to reform, to enforce some amount of chemical safety for Americans?
I think he would be very proud of the effort that Senator Vitter and I have put in to try to take on the big forces that don't want to do this, and he would really like the idea that we have a good, solid bill. He would know that the perfect should not be the enemy of the good, and he would say to me, he'd say, Tom, move it, do it right, and get it done.
Well, now you have an audience of New Mexicans out there. What do we need to know, and what do we need to do?
Well, one of the things that I think binds us all together is our economy in New Mexico, and trying to make sure that every one of our children that wants to stay here in New Mexico, have a good job, live in their community, be with their family, that you can achieve that. And so I'm working with our military bases, our national laboratories, the entrepreneurial community to try to make sure we make that happen. That's my top priority. I'm working hard on it, and we come back to New Mexico, and as I've just pointed out here on one of these events that we worked on today, work with everybody to try to make that happen.
We don't have time, but you've done so much work with the veterans and the VA. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, our vets, they deserve it, and I always want to be there with them.
And another thing, your dad worked so much with the downwinders, the whole uranium cleanup. Is there any update on what's happening with cleaning up the uranium tailings?
We need to do a lot more there. They're at the Tularosa Basin in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole downwinders issue that hasn't been addressed. I'm going to be going out there in the next couple of weeks, and there's an anniversary. We're trying to gather and say their injustices also need to be addressed, just like the downwinders were.
Wow. Do you get tired? There's a lot of injustices that need to be
Try
addressed.
to get a good night of sleep every night and get a little exercise and have the energy to move forward.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for everything you do. Our guest today is Senator Tom Udall. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Marie. You're a great journalist, and you do a lot for New Mexico.
Well, I try to get a good night's sleep and start fresh every day because there's a lot of injustices for both of us to fight. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.